So a while back, I saw a trailer for the new Bird Box movie, Barcelona, and I was thinking, hey, yeah, I haven't seen the first one, right? So I decided to give it a try. I hated it. It was literally just The Happening with extra steps. But that did get me to think about The Happening and the kind of category it fits in the horror genre as a whole. So I'm not a major horror fan, but these past few years have given us some pretty good horror movies in general. And horror has the unique advantage of being able to split off into different niches pretty easily compared to other genres. So the more I thought about the similarities between Bird Box and The Happening, I started to think about a potentially untapped market for the horror genre that could definitely do pretty well in this day and age. And while I don't think there's an official name for it, I'm dubbing it Neuro Horror. To summarize, Neuro Horror can be described as those kinds of movies that prey on the vulnerability of your senses. Bird Box kind of falls into that category, but as I was thinking about this idea, I kind of found some different movies that better fit the bill. Granted, the criteria for it is kind of lax, the main focus being damage to your perception of the world, but it's terrifying in a unique way that hits a lot closer to home than your average zombie movie or home invasion or things of that sort. So the crux of Neuro Horror is a combination of fear from having your mind compromised and the sheer plausibility of the event that triggers it. So let's take a look at these two more well-known examples to get an idea of what we're looking for in this genre. So let's start with The Happening. It's fair that it gets memed on so much because hindsight is 20/20, but I've been a fan of this movie for a long time, even when it first came out. You could spend all day talking to me about how hammy the acting and the line delivery was, but at the end of the day, the main crisis of the movie is what cements it as a decent horror film in its own right. I mean, how would you react if you saw everyone around you committing suicide on a mass scale? And remember, it took them like days to figure out what exactly was going wrong, and even then, they didn't get a clear picture until months later. And the whole movie took place in about, I want to say 3 days? So 3 days straight, you have this unexplained phenomenon that you know spreads, but you can't see it. And you don't know you're affected until everyone else around you is affected. And I don't know about you, but that to me is scary enough to where I legitimately didn't really want to watch the movie too many times after I saw it the first time. The same can be said, to a lesser degree at least, for Bird Box as well. Both movies' loss of sense is a sense of self-preservation, even though it manifests itself in two different ways. But both can't be seen by the naked eye. The only indication that somebody is affected, by the time you realize that they are, there's a high chance that you're next. And it's not something that you can run away from either. Even as a survivor, later on you're still going to have to deal with the psychological damage of seeing everybody mass off themselves for years to come. But to be fair, these movies are kind of cheating. The sensory problems with these movies come from an outside source, which is easy enough to explain off as movie logic. But these next few movies, their problems originate from the inside, which is even more terrifying. So these next two movies are slightly more grim than the previous two, but they're still winnable situations if you manage to keep your cool. So first up is Blindness, made in 2008. Essentially, one day, literally out of nowhere, there's a guy in a car and he gets struck blind. And shortly after that, his blindness spreads like a wildfire across the populace, to the point where it becomes a countrywide phenomenon. This movie has the Hulk himself and Julianne Moore as a doctor and his wife respectively, with his wife being the only one immune to the blindness so far that we know. When things start to spread rapidly, we get the government moving really fast to quarantine everybody in an old mental hospital. But it only takes about a couple of days before it's completely overfilled. And the military aren't really even doing anything to help. They're just stationed outside to keep them in. So as you would expect, on the inside things start to dissolve super quickly and showcases the worst that humanity has to offer. I mean, we got filth covering all the floors, random racist and hate crimes being committed, and there's even one wing of the hospital that's hoarding all the food in exchange for the women of the other sections of the hospital, which ends up killing a woman in one of the roughest parts of the movie. That only goes on for so long though, as one of the blind women that was assaulted during the forced trade for food sets fire to the whole place and kills just about everybody except our main group. Luckily, Julianne's able to lead the group through the streets back to their original house from the beginning of the movie, and that's where they camp out and survive for as long as they think they can, really, with the last bits of food and energy that they have left. So, this situation is objectively terrible, but it's still winnable. Arguably, the worst part about it was dealing with the human element of everybody else going blind and just showing themselves as the shittiest human beings that they can be. The premise for this one is a little more grounded relative to the other movies that I'm talking about today. And this one is called Awake, made in 2021. Awake stars Gina Rodriguez. Man, she's so fun. Playing a security guard in a world where what appears to be a monster of a solar flare rewires everyone's brains to be unable to sleep. We learn a little bit later as the movie progresses that the solar flare also destroyed most electronics in the world, barring the military grade hardware. And during one scene, it's mentioned that it has a strange effect on the coma patients of a local hospital. We soon learn that Gina's daughter is one of the only two people known to be able to sleep after surviving a nearly fatal car crash early in the movie, which will be relevant later. We also get the ominous warning that if they don't find a solution within 5 days, everyone is dropping dead. So Gina reluctantly takes her kids to the military lab to try to find a solution to make sure everyone survives. The chaos starts slowly at first, as I'm sure many of you have had some experience with some sleepless nights, but things ramp up exponentially as time passes, with some becoming straight up fanatical and falling back on religion as if this is the precursor to the rapture. As we come up upon our third day, Gina and her kids are unfortunately caught in the middle of a prison break, but thankfully they run into an inmate that still has his wits about him. Motherfucking Dodge. Dodge is hands down the MVP of this movie for me, just based off this one line.
Alright, bye kids. It's time for me to get the fuck out of Dodge.
The absolute cheek of the directors to include this scene, and to name the character just to pull this one moment off. Anyway, it's crazy that the prison break wasn't even the biggest threat to the group's safety, because right after that they run into a group of cannibals. By day 5, they're officially in the endgame, and they finally reach the military lab, which coincidentally is the most dangerous place to be. The lab is heavily guarded with a lot of soldiers that are taking a cocktail of drugs just to stay alert, but it's shown to be causing massive neurological damage to them in the process. Once Gina and her kids arrive, the daughter is captured, and they begin to move towards the final steps to cutting open her skull, when one guard outside has a hallucination that sets off the whole compound like a stack of dominoes. And next thing you know, it turns into a whole Call of Duty lobby out there. And by the next morning, everybody is dead, but the daughter figures out the loophole on why she was able to sleep. Making reference back to the car crash from the beginning of the movie, she realizes that you have to die and be revived in order to reset your brain. So her and her brother resolve to slightly drown Gina in a lake and then revive her, which is bleak as hell by all means, but it's still a winnable situation. But this next movie, oh no, it's not. Oh no, it's certain doom once things start to get rolling. This movie, man, this movie fucked me up big time. This is, without a doubt, the most hopeless movie I'd ever seen. And I've seen The Road. And if you know about that movie, you know how depressing that can get. But this is in a league of its own, man. And the craziest part about it is this is a romance movie. The super messed up part is a subplot, and the trailer does very little to communicate that fact to you. I think you only get about 10 minutes of normalcy before the first signs of something going wrong start, and it's just all downhill from there. So the basic premise of this movie is that a chef, played by Ewan McGregor, is kind of an ass, but he meets an equally assholish partner in Ava Green, who plays an epidemiologist that lives above the restaurant where he works. So eventually they begin a relationship, mostly through screwing, as they navigate their baggage as they become more devoted to each other. But once you start getting into the B plot, in the background of their love story, the world is experiencing a pandemic unlike anything it's ever seen before. They call it severe olfactory syndrome. Nobody knows where it came from or how it started, but all they can really do is wait. So, SOS, as it's morbidly named, starts off slow at first, taking away your sense of smell and then your sense of taste, and eventually moves on to your other senses like hearing and then sight and then eventually touch. But what's sinister about it is that you get an extreme burst of a different emotion right before the sense burns out in your brain. The effects are prolonged too. This movie takes place over the course of 3 weeks or so, and they try to pass it off as the world adapting well to the change. But by the end of the movie, we only get 4 of the 5 senses destroyed. The ending of the movie cuts to black as sight is lost, and we're left to ponder how the world lives in darkness as they wait for their sense of touch to eventually disappear. Soon the entire world will be floating in a dark nothingness, existing for at least another week before they feel themselves expired, helpless to do nothing but observe, and then no more. Fucking shivers just thinking about it, man. Like, what the hell? How do you run a normal love story with a human extinction event as a B-plot? I swear, this movie legitimately traumatized me when I first watched it. So much so that I blocked it out of my memory until coming up to this video. I'm sure there are probably a dozen movies that I haven't mentioned that also fit into this subgenre, so feel free to comment on some good ones down below. I still have some mixed feelings about horror overall, but I think it would be neat to explore more things that could fall into the category of neuro horror. Something like a continuation of the end of Perfect Sense, where we could explore how a person would cope with the loss of the sense of touch, or something else that we take for granted that brings about the same sense of anxiety that the other movies did. So yeah, that was it for me. I just wanted to come on and talk about some decent movies that had me thinking for a little bit after the movie ended, and also coming to defend The Happening, as I do every couple of years or so, and also to come and say that Bird Box sucks, and I don't know why it was popular. But yeah, I'm interested in exploring more fringe ideas of horror as well, so we'll see how things go with that. But I'll catch you guys in the next one.